Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. First of all, I'd like to thank the Portuguese Ambassador for the exceptional interest he's shown in the kind of work that we're doing, and I look forward very much to all of you coming with him to view our library later on at the end of our proceedings. Firstly, it is necessary to, however briefly, because of the short time available, to analyse the basic differences between how the two monarchies of Spain and Portugal handled their Jewish problem. In the expulsion of 1492 from Spain, the Jews had a choice: convert or depart the country. The majority, particularly the poorer ones, chose the latter course and departed overland to the nearest place, Portugal. The King of Portugal believed, incorrectly, that all Jews were rich, and this influx would swell his depleted coffers. Realising his mistake, only a year later, in 1493, he wrested 2,000 children between the ages of 2 and 12 from their parents and sent them to the two small desolate islands he had recently colonised off the western coast of Africa, São Tomé e Príncipe, where nearly 500 years later I was chosen to be one of the 3 representatives of Israel at a conference arranged there by the Israeli ambassador, Moshe Lieber, to commemorate those children. In these islands we found vestiges of Jewish life and ritual even today. In 1496, the Portuguese king wanted to marry Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter, but they refused the match unless Portugal became, like Spain, free of Jews. The king then forcibly converted the Portuguese Jews, as well as the considerable number of Spanish Jews who had fled the Inquisition, into Portugal. And that after the Inquisition came later, although the Inquisition came later to Portugal, it often rivaled the Spanish Inquisition in its intensity. The forced converts, Christos Novos, managed to retain much of their Jewish identities, although secretly. They left Portugal when they could, and the diaspora of the Jews from Portugal continued to flow out of Portugal and later, as late as the mid-18th century. It can be attested by the registers of many diaspora Sephardi synagogues, where the sermons were given for many years in Spanish or Portuguese. For example, in the London Bevis Marks marriage records, copies of which we hold here in the library in Netanya, there are entries for this period, often including the words Vidos de Portugal, refugees from Portugal, for the couples of all ages who had recently arrived and were marrying in the synagogue, usually with no mention of a town of origin, because they'd still left family behind. The new arrivals brought with them not only the Portuguese language, but also a way of life that in most locations included the Ladino language. Although Ladino was little used in Amsterdam, it was in everyday use elsewhere in the Portuguese diaspora. These refugees from Portugal clung to the Sephardi ritual, preserving their music and ways of cooking, which endures until today. The Portuguese Jewish diaspora went initially and mainly to Holland and Belgium, but quickly spread to England, followed by ventures further afield in various locations in America, especially the Caribbean, and later in South Africa. Today, we know that a number of families desperate to find a safe haven pretended to be Huguenot Protestants in France and later appeared in England and Ireland. I found graves in the Huguenot cemetery of the Lobato family in Cork, Ireland, 3 years ago. This family was very involved all over the Portuguese world, but in this instance by bringing William III from Holland to seize the British throne upon the death of the childish Charles II. Lobato supplied the British Army in all its needs of occupation of the turbulent southern Ireland, whilst others of the same origins by the names of Pereira da Silva, Francesco de Cordoba, Antonio de Carres, Manuel Machado, and Salazar, and Jacob Teixeira were more active in the northern part of Ireland. It is documented that the actual purveying needs in transporting from the Netherlands into Northern Ireland for the King William III ultimately defeated the James the Catholic, pretender to the British throne. And Labato and his associates had to acquire 28 bakers, 700 to 800 horses, and some 300 wagons to fill the soldiers' daily needs. Other Portuguese family names cropping up in this respect are Machado and Pereira. Often these traders supplied their own money to forward the movement of an urgently awaited supplies, and it was also recorded that not all the money was paid back. Many secret Jews left Portugal outwardly as Catholics to go to the Portuguese trading port of Goa in the Indian peninsula, and later becoming open Jews and leaders of the Jewish community in India. And we are exceptionally proud and delighted to have people here in the audience today who are descended from these families and countries. It's surprising how constantly vibrant was the business communications between Iberia and the Jewish communities outside. We know that having arrived in safety, many kept returning by secret routes for brief periods, usually for business. A few years ago, I was in the border town of Vermicelli, where the Juderia is still in place, on the Spanish side of the Portuguese border. Here I saw tunnels underneath the houses, some going some 3 kilometres underground into Portugal. And even today, the local residents know for what reason they were used. Somehow these Jews, mostly of Spanish forebears, spoke fluent Portuguese and Spanish, quickly learned to speak and conduct commerce in the language of whatever country they were trading, be it Dutch, English, etc., at the same time communicating amongst themselves in Hebrew too, all of which was handed down throughout the generations. Descendants of the Portuguese Jewish refugees have made their mark in many areas of society. Just a few examples are Moses Cohen Henriquez, the Caribbean pirate, Baruch Spinoza, the renegade Jewish philosopher, and of course the author Emma Lazarus. Many secretly professing Jews in Portugal found an escape route by going to Brazil, as this country developed, and today we know that all these centuries later, there are more secret Jews there who still adhere to their Jewish faith than anywhere else in the world. Sadly, at present, the Israeli government takes hardly any interest in these very special and potential olim. It's very difficult to give a coherent overview of the depth of the problem in the limited time that I have, but I hope the following will be a good example. Recently, a lady, I'll call her Anna, visited us here in the Institute, armed with papers that showed how her grandmother, who was born in one of the Portuguese colonies islands in the Atlantic in 1883, had an official government birth certificate that stated she was of Jewish descent. Later, her grandmother, like so many others, emigrated with her husband to the United States, in an area much favoured by people of a similar background. All kept alive the Portuguese language and ways. When her daughter, Anna's mother, grew up, she married amongst her own kind too. And although outwardly they led a Catholic existence, the couple, at the parents' insistence, had an Orthodox Ashkenazi rabbi marry them, as he did so many others. It is many years before this bride of long ago confided to her daughter, Anna, the truth of her origins. My visitor proudly presented me, Casa Shalom, with a copy of her parents' secret Jewish Hebrew ketubah, which was the spur that led this then widow and her own 4 children to return to Judaism and make plans for Aliyah. Today she lives in Israel and is happily remarried. 1 child is here and the rest are on the way in the very near future with their families. So hopefully you see, just as a little of the ongoing thread of this vibrant Portuguese diaspora, both from the Jewish and Portuguese standpoints, and I thank you for your attention.